Alright, we'll go ahead and split this case. We're going to pull this transmission apart here. We've got your shift linkage coming out the top here, so we'll have to remove that before we can get too far, but we'll pull the gears out that we can, which may not be any of them without removing that. So go ahead and pull that 10 millimeter, or excuse me, 8 millimeter, holding that arm in. Oops, I've got a 10 on there, so it is an 8. And that holds that, which holds a little clip. And now that will come out. We'll be able to raise that up enough to pull everything. So this comes down, it'll actually have to come out the bottom, but that'll allow us to pull everything out right now. And I try to keep as much of this together as possible. That way we don't have to wonder where it goes going back together. But there's always manuals and microfiches and common sense to put it back together. Probably get that. I'm going to tip this up, see a little bit better, but this was in the bottom there. That's your output there. This was underneath here. So I was pulling up this, slid that out. We've got one gear that connects to this on the bottom here, kind of sits behind everything, and that hooks to that chain. So I'm going to set this down here and I'll try to pull this all up together. There we go. And then we've got one gear that also stayed on the bottom of this. So this larger gear here goes on this larger assembly. This sprocket here goes on the end of that. And there's that chain. So we've got your shift shaft here with your shift forks. And looks like we'll have to pull a 10 millimeter bolt to remove that shift assembly. You can push the other side out, so it's wanting to come out now. And there's your shift forks. That bolt slides on the end of there, holding this in. Now we'll be able to push this down, and there's your shift linkage there. Now we'll get ready to split this case. Before we do that, we'll pull this cam chain. And we've got Phillips heads. And a lot of times when they're in the motor like this, they've got thread lock on them. So we'll take an impact driver here and a hammer, loosen those up. Doesn't take much. Generally, they're not very long, but a lot of times they're too hard to get with a screwdriver. Plus, they've got oil on them, make them slick to get with a screwdriver. It's possible, but if you got an impact driver, just hit them one time like that. Now that'll allow us to pull this kind of a keeper off here, or a holder. Keeps that cam chain from slipping off and jumping teeth on the bottom there. Still possible, but a little less likely with that. Got your cam chain here. And we've got one more guide that we'll need to pull with an Allen. Number 5, it looks like. Make sure that's seated well. No way to get vice grips on that one unless you just break that off. So loosen up there. We've got your oil pressure relief valve here. We'll pull that off. That's a 17 millimeter. Here's your other cam chain guide. This is where the tensioner hits right there. $17mm, take, pull that. It's oil pressure relief valve there going to your oil filter. And we will flip this over and pull the rest of the crankcase bolts. Shouldn't be any other crankcase bolts on this side, so we'll flip it there. We've got lots of 8mm again on this side. Sure, we may not have any 10mm on this one, so pull this quick and that'll be it. All right, that's 15 8mm bolts. We'll see if we missed any. All right, now these are a lot easier to split because it's kind of a small piece and a large piece. So you can just kind of hang on right here, and I like to take a hammer, just kind of tap. Make sure you're not tapping on an area where there's going to be a bolt. Break it free there. Now you're able to get a screwdriver in there, just kind of file on a little bit, kind of finish breaking it free. Now you don't want to damage any areas. Make sure that gasket seals nicely, so don't turn your screwdriver or twist it, or use a large screwdriver if you can. Enough to get your fingers in there. And then I like to go ahead and tip it up so anything that's in there doesn't fall out at the bottom. All right, we'll pull that off there. There's your crank. Got your crank balancer here. And we've got your engine case here, the larger on the side there. We'll push that crank out. Looks like we're not able to pull that balancer gear until that crank is pulled. So grab a rubber mallet. See if we get that crank out of there. Make sure you're not binding with your crank balancer. We're getting close to it. Might be able to pull that crank balancer out there now if there's enough room. That way you know you're not binding. Still not quite enough room, but we're awful close to getting this out. Blow my hammer apart here, but all right, crank balancer is out there. And we have the crank about ready to come out, but my hammer's falling apart here, so we'll consider it out. The bearing's coming out with it. We can push the bearing off the other way when we get it out. Don't want to reuse those bearings anyway. So that's the engine breakdown on a Prairie 400.